So we are now recording and live. Well, um, welcome to the start of our webinar on embraining. And basically, this is a mini introduction to MBIT training and what embraining offers us in terms of coherent decision making. And so what I wanted to start with, Vikki, is a small introduction of yourself, if you don't mind. And then, we'll go into what we're talking about. What is embraining?
Okay. So my name is Vikki Coombes, and I'm a New Zealander who lives in London, and I've been in the UK for 17 years. I've been coaching, training, doing people and change work from a consulting perspective, and various other careers as well, since my mid-teens. So for me, when I came across embraining, it was a natural addition to everything else that I had, really. So at the moment, I have my own business as a coach and consultant and a trainer. So that's me in a nutshell, really. Very much in a nutshell.
All righty. Okay. So when we're talking about embraining, we'll just start with the very basics of, the whole neuroscience versus, where this starts for Grant and Martin, who kind of come up with it, if that's okay.
Yeah, so embraining started when Grant Susalu and Marvin Oka met up over a large glass of red wine and started talking, and both of them have neurolinguistic programming as part of their backgrounds, as do I. And they were exploring, Grant is really, really into science in a big way. His initial background is science. Marvin is very much into the behavioural modelling and coaching side of things, and the two of them just started talking about some of the articles that Grant had been reading about, certainly from a neuroscience perspective, as to what was being discovered in that field. And when we're talking neuroscience, it wasn't just the head-brain neuroscience. It was, we have neurology throughout all of our body, and Grant was reading all of these articles, and he's interested across the whole spectrum. So he was reading a whole lot of stuff that other people might have been missing because they keep very siloed, and he was looking across. He also, as does Marvin, have a huge background in various esoteric beliefs, and we're very curious about that as well. And what they were both noticing as they were having this conversation was these patterns. And actually, if these truths were coming out of neuroscience and were backed up by thousands of years of practice and various esoteric beliefs around the world, what was that about? And what did it mean? And what kind of, and again, definitely from an NLP perspective, that's all about modeling excellence, right? And they were like, well, okay, so if neuroscience is defining these, at that stage, 3 intelligence centers as brains because they are complex, adaptive, functioning neurology, then if they're a brain, does that mean they communicate? If they're a brain, do they have functions? Are they separate? Do they have different functions from one another? So they started asking themselves these questions, and then they started researching this, and they did a huge amount of behavioral modeling around it. And as they did that, embraining began to take shape, and they learned a lot around how our different intelligence centers within our bodies, what they do, how they behave, how we access those, what happens when you actually get them aligned, and it just all began to come together. And every single piece of it, Grant would go, okay, if that's true, is there any science behind it? Where's the evidence?
Right.
And even now, he will still go, oh, I found some more science, there's some more research, there's some more science, so there's constant, here's more evidence, I'm not just making this up. So that's how it started, and over probably a 2 to 3 year period, they created and built and evolved the initial embraining, which was when they launched this book. So
Right.
in-braining, right, doing cool stuff with your multiple brains, or using your multiple brains to do cool stuff. And in that, they focused on your head. They talked about your heart brain, your head brain, and your gut brain, and
Right.
how you work with those and do cool stuff with them.
Okay. And obviously, that's expanded now to autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic, sympathetic, understanding, for example, more about the vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And that the role of that in communication as well as in the very neurology
Mm-hmm.
of how we communicate within ourselves,
Yeah, yeah.
and the wisdom in that. So if we move from that into, say, for example, the coaching modality, because I mean, you talked about NLP at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and how they both came from an NLP background, and yet they take this into a coaching modality that is almost standalone, but still very much tied, it seems, to NLP and other modalities of coaching. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so they were very careful as they were creating the multiple, the in-braining integrative techniques and the roadmap. And they refer to it as a roadmap because it is about following a particular path, but you can do that road in different ways, right? And their whole thing was they wanted it to complement and work with other modalities. It can, as you said, absolutely, I use the roadmap with my clients as a standalone, and at other times I use parts of it with some NLP or with some cognitive behavior or with some transactional analysis, whatever it might be, or just general questioning to draw it through. I'll still have some in-braining in there. And so when they looked at this, they wanted it to be, you didn't have to come from an NLP background in order to understand and learn this. This is one of the things I love about in-braining compared to a lot of the other modalities that I've learned in my career, is in-braining is both simply profound and profoundly simple. And a number of people I've trained have got no coaching background at all. And yet they've been able to learn and take it on board and then take it back into their day-to-day lives. So we've had managers, we've had health professionals, we've had people who work in the industrial relations part of the business. So it's applicable in all sorts of different ways. It gets the reason that Grant and Marvin chose coaching as their way of bringing in-braining out into the world was because they sat there and went, this profoundly simple, simply profound roadmap has the capacity to transform our world in very positive ways, from the point of view, very resourceful ways, from the point of view of starting from a place of compassion. And they sat there and went, okay, so if that's the case, what would be a really powerful way to do that? And they looked at coaching from the point of view of a lot of people who have coaches are senior executives in companies. And so they said, rather than trying to get in with the junior people and try and get them involved, how do we, if we start at the top and we do some work at the top, these people have influence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's why it's a coaching modality, and yet actually it's something that's very useful in anybody's day-to-day.
Yeah, and that's why we would then find, a lot of people in leadership doing this kind of coaching training, but they're not actually having any intention of becoming a coach.
No, so they'll use it in their one-to-one work with their teams or in the way they do their own decision-making. They may use it in the way that they bring their teams to make decisions, but yeah, so all the friends I know who've done it, who are coaches, say it, it absolutely complements, and they'll use, they don't sit there and go, I'm using embraining, therefore I must do this. They go, okay, this works here, this works here. I myself, as I said, mix it up. I know you mixed it up. So that's where it's a beautiful, beautiful and evolving roadmap. It isn't set in stone. We're early doors in the field. And so there's constant evolving of what we know, what we understand. As I said, neuroscience itself is in its early stages as a scientific field, and there's so much. It's like we think we've got to the last frontier within our knowledge of our human becoming, and yet then something else gets discovered, and then something else, and then they start bringing the things together, and they realize that when they bring them together, that opens up even more information. And that's what's happened with embraining, because embraining looked at everything, not just this part of neurology or this part. It was like what happens in the whole system.
So is it true to say that this was in a way kicked off by the book, The Second Brain, that refers literally to the gut? Is that one of the kickoff points that Marvin and Grant kind of looked at and said, well, wait a minute, there's more than just two brains?
Yeah, so certainly that was one of the feeds, but I mean, as I said, so Grant's idea of a bedtime reading is to sit down with a scientific journal. So he is constantly taking on board and finding out what is the latest stuff within various scientific fields. And what he had noticed was patterns, right? So he'd noticed this journal over here talking about this, and this journal over here talking about this, and then this one over here, and then things like that book, The Second Brain, came out, all that kind of stuff. And he went, hold on, why are these not all, what's going on here? So that's where that came from.
So recognizing those connections in things that people thought were disconnected.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, we talk about, so there you mentioned the book, the gut is your second brain. But actually what we now know is that your gut is the first brain to form when you are forming within your mother's womb, right? So actually your gut is your first brain, and your heart is your second brain. The head brain is kind of the newcomer.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Wow. So I'd said when advertising this that, we were going to really get into how does this help us with decision making?
Yeah.
Because it's all fine and well knowing the neuroscience. It's all fine and well saying, well, this is, we can use this in coaching. And obviously there is, as coaches, many people come to us because they're stuck and they are looking for us to guide them through a decision-making process.
Yeah.
But as you've already said, there's directors, there's educators, there's health professionals. There's simply doing the training to help them within decision-making processes of their companies, or as consultants, or within their professional environment, either in communication with their team or simply individually in making decisions. So I'd like to explore a little bit more, and I think I asked like 5 questions in the one.
Yeah, thanks.
But maybe let's start with the coaching helping for decision making, and then let's move on to the other areas in which this idea of coherence or alignment helps us with decision making.
Yeah. So what embraining does is it starts off by helping us understand and know how to access the communication that each of our brains is giving us. So our brains and our multiple brains, and by brains I'm talking about our gut, our heart and our head, are communicating all the time. And what Marvin and Grant found was that they are communicating individually. They have their own communication. They communicate in their own styles. They also communicate with one another all of the time. Like, that's constantly happening. However, what they also found, and I'm sure all of us can think of a situation where this has happened, is one brain may swamp the others and be very loud, right?
Like the
One
monkey
brain, yeah, or I mean, certainly in the Western world and in a lot of business, which is very Western structured, that's very, very head-based. It's all about logic. It's all about data. It's all about, show me, light it up.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare, although this is changing, which is a positive thing, and we are absolutely thrilled by it. But it's still rare to have a leader stand up in a company and say, I feel how important this is. I value what difference we're making in the world, right? That's really rare. So I would say a lot of Western businesses, yes, very, very head-based and gut, because gut is action. So a lot of Western businesses make decisions up here and then do something without connecting here to find out if it feels right, if it's going to impact the world or their community or their business or their employees or their customers in ways that are resourceful. So anyway, so it teaches you how to connect with those communications, how to access them, and to comprehend what each of the brains might be trying to share with you about a particular situation. So a decision is you've got something going on and you need to make a choice, right? That's what a decision is, primarily, when you boil it down. And each of your brains will have something to communicate in relation to that decision. And I mean, I've got a very good friend who, when her and I first started working together and getting to know each other and sharing time together and sharing experiences together, very heart-led. She did everything based on how she felt about it. Very rarely did her head brain get a look in. And she's very heart gut. So she'd feel something, she'd do it. Right? No consideration of consequences or anything like that. So I, at the time, was very head-based, head gut. So I'd line up all the logic, go, this makes sense, do. No feeling. And so when we became friends, what we actually taught each other was our strengths. She taught me to be okay with emotion and feelings and to express them and to accept them and to that kind of stuff. I began to help her pause and do some logical thinking before she made a decision. So even before, this is before I even knew about embraining. Mm-hmm. So there are people like that, right? And we've all been there. We all do that kind of thing where we suddenly have this amazing emotion and we make a decision in that very emotional stage, whether it's a resourceful or unresourceful decision. We'll make it when we're high emotion. Mm-hmm. And then, 2 weeks, 3 months, a couple of years later, we go, oh my goodness, mm-hmm. What were we thinking? Right? And the thing was, you weren't thinking. So embraining helps you at that point. So you start by accessing, okay, what are each of my brains wanting to share with me about the situation I'm in and what options I have and what decision I might make.
Right.
So it's not at that point, the communication isn't at that point about making the decision. It's just about connecting and finding out what the communication is, mm-hmm. and where there might be a disconnect.
So talking about disconnect, if somebody, for example, is procrastinating.
Yes. Which I never do, obviously.
No. Of course, I never got a master's in procrastination. But there's a disconnect there as well. You might feel passionate about something, and that passion only takes you so far.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very, very good at being passionate about something and having lots of ideas about how I might achieve that passion, mm-hmm. and doing absolutely nothing.
Right. And that's another one of those disconnects where you don't have the gut involved and therefore you don't have the movement forward, correct?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier on that one of the things embraining discovered was that, yes, each of the brains communicates, and they each have primary functions, and that those are distinctive primary functions. And so one of the challenges we also have as human becomings is that we have, depending on our culture, depending on the family environment, religion, society, etc., personality to a degree, we have often we've tried to get one brain to do the primary function of the other brain or another brain, right?
So, for example, when somebody says that willpower doesn't work, that's because we're trying to use our head and our willpower to push us through something that really belongs in our gut, which is our movement.
And absolutely. And also often people, when they're talking about doing something from willpower, are absolutely up here and they don't have that emotional connection to whatever it is they're wanting to achieve.
Okay.
So because one of the key things we've learned through embraining is the starting point is your heart. So if you think of your heart as just this tiny little clog in a clock, if you find the smallest clog in a clock and you stop it, it will stop the whole clock. And it's very easy to do.
Okay.
If you try and find the biggest clog in a clock and try and stop it, it's really, really hard to do because it's so huge and so powerfully, it's already moving and there's all sorts of other bits moving to make it move. Whereas if you find that smallest piece and do it, and that's what we found with the heart, is if you start from the heart, if things are powered from the heart to start with, the energy comes from the heart, then you're much more likely, because you have a strong emotional true desire to have whatever this is. However, that's not the only thing though. So again, like I said about my friend who was very emotionally led when I first met her, you know, some of her decisions in retrospect lacked wisdom. And this is about, you know, embraining is about moving from this place into what we call our highest expressing. Okay. But before we get there, we've got our primary functions. So the primary functions of the heart is connecting, is values, is emoting, right? That's what the primary functions of your heart are. The primary functions of your head brain are to make meaning, logic, optioneering, coming up with all new ideas, opening up new pathways. And the primary functions of your gut brain, as Beth Ann's already alluded to, is action, it's motivation, and is also your fear and security center, because what your gut brain, as I said before, your gut brain is the first one to develop as you are evolving within your mother's womb. And that's where your sense of identity is. That's where your self sits, is within your gut. That's why it's your risk and security center as well, because it's sitting there going, is this self, is it not self?
Where our immune system is mostly in our gut as well.
70, 80%.
Yeah. Is this self or not self? Is this me or not me? Do I digest this or don't I?
Yeah, exactly. Do I do something with this or do I not do something with this? So those are the primary functions. And so not only when you're accessing the communication, when you're accessing that communication from each of the brains, you are looking for, you know, are they connecting with one another? Is there a blockage? Is there a reason, you know, are two of them on board with something and one of them isn't, or one of them's really on board and two of them aren't, you know, what's going on there? Find out what information you can get. And then once you've identified that, then you can start working with it. And as Beth Ann talked about earlier, move in towards what we call congruence, bringing alignment. Because when you've got alignment and you're congruent between your brains, so your heart is truly wants, you know, your head really knows, and your gut deeply needs, and they're in alignment on all of that, you then have so much more possibility of going out and doing something amazing and something different. And so we move into this place where we can then, through embraining, work with ourselves or with our clients or with team members to bring them into that congruent place, from which you then lead them into what we call the highest expressing. And again, it's still around whatever situation it is that they want to be in, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they're trying to make a decision about.
Yeah.
But you're getting them to a congruent place about this situation, that they then look at the situation from this highest expressing. And what we've discovered is that, again, just as each of the brains has a distinctive set of primary functions, it also, each brain has what we call the highest expressing.
Right.
So your heart, the highest expressing of your heart is compassion.
Yeah.
And so if we're starting from the heart and we start every situation, we've got this situation, we're trying to make a decision, and we're in a place where we're congruent and we look at it compassion, from a place of compassion, that's where we're starting from about this situation. Then we move into the head brain and we go, okay, so I'm compassionate about it, and this is how I'm feeling compassionately about this. What are my options? And the highest expressing of your head brain is creativity.
Right.
But compassionate creativity.
Uh-huh.
So you get that and you go, okay, so I'm in this wonderful place where you're being compassionate and creative. Well, often what that means when you're being compassionately creative is you're going to need to step outside your comfort zone and do something different that no one else is doing.
Okay.
So you can imagine in a business world, or if you're working with a coaching client who's sitting there saying, in my culture, it's completely wrong to make this type of decision, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But actually who they are and where they want to go with their lives is saying, this is one, these are the options for you. And you're absolutely, your client or your managing director or whoever is absolutely lit up with this. It takes courage. So your highest expressing of your gut brain is courage, because it's courage to move beyond any fear. It's courage that says, I've looked at all of the options. I know what the risks are. I've put in mitigating situations. I'm willing to take this risk, and I'm going to courageously, creatively, compassionately move forward.
Right.
And so that's what we're doing. And so when people are in that place where they're highest expressing, then they move in to what we call generative decision making.
Yeah. And so you're generating a completely new solution, and one that you're able to move forward on. And that obviously works even within teams.
Oh yeah.
I know one of the conversations that we had with someone who was a director that was in the course I did on MBIT. And he was looking just at the very way that he communicated with his team members, asking them about needs and desires, not simply about give me the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also when talking to the clients, what did the client need and desire, as opposed to what data do we have to make this decision on?
Yeah. And what was really interesting about the whole way you just said that was that it was very Kiwi of you to say data instead of data, as the rest of the world does. But it's good that you've still got that connection. But what was interesting for me about that individual you're talking about is, so their team focuses on data. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. However, they actually work for a company that's all about data. That's what they sell, right? So for him to step out of that, even a small bit, and start saying, actually, yes, we've got the data. How do you feel about it? What is it making you feel? What's there? How do you feel? What do you want? That kind of thing. And then going, okay, well, that's really interesting. What do you need? So you want that, but what do you need? Mm-hmm. And for him, it just opened up with his team. And I happen to know him because he happens to be my partner. What he's described recently is how his relationships with his team have changed in quality.
Right. Because of the connection.
Yeah, and not just his relationships with his teams, but as he's working with his team members, their relationship with their stakeholders.
Right.
their relationship with their third-party suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things we discovered through all the inbraining work, and particularly in the work that the inbraining community does with heart math, is we entrain, right? All of us entrain others. Yes. So again, decisions often get made out of this process where we've entrained. So what I'm talking about there is where, say you're in the office and you're working and you're bound to know someone who has this impact. They arrive in the office and the mood goes woof.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they arrive in the office and the mood goes woof.
Yeah.
That's entraining, and it's entraining from the heart.
Right.
And so again, through inbraining, we are much more in control of how we are entraining, what we're bringing out to the world, what we're putting out there. If we're starting from a place of compassion, we are entraining that as we go out. If we're starting from a place of appreciation and gratitude and joy as we go into the world, that's what we are entraining. And because we're congruent, because we're coherent, our entraining is a lot stronger than someone who isn't. Mm-hmm. And so that allows us to have more influence on what is happening around us, which also helps us in our decision making.
Yeah. Okay. So that highest expression, the final piece of that highest expression, obviously, is our inner wisdom. Mm-hmm. Reaching that place of wisdom for now. But one of the things that we talked about, well, just before we move on, if anyone has any questions as we go, please feel free to type them in the comments and ask them to us. I do have the chat box open to actually look for questions if any come up. But
really,
in any case,
really pleased to see that Sharon and Lou have joined us. Sharon, I watched your gratitude discussion with Beth a couple of weeks ago and was blown away, and I'd love to see you on an MBIT training very soon. I'd love to see you all on one, but I just happened to see Sharon and was very impressed with what she had to share with us in that session. But please ask questions.
Okay, so anyway, going back to what I was saying, okay, we're talking about highest expression going into wisdom, but we also talked about how we're not just human beings, we are human becomings.
Yeah.
And so you and I talked a little bit about neuroplasticity, how we can not only entrain ourselves in terms of our preparation of how we're going to walk into a room, how we're going to be congruent, but even moving forward in life and with the obstacles and the changing situations that life throws at us, how we're working through that.
So, again, one of the things that, anybody who's done anything in the neurological fields will know this, is the whole concept of neuroplasticity, that, we've got all these sayings within our societies around things like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And what we're discovering is how wrong that is, right? And as they're discovering this about neuroplasticity and the fact that by doing things differently, by opening up pathways and giving ourselves different options, we are constantly evolving. And we've also discovered that our cells, and I'm going to get this wrong because, but there's something about a certain number of years, is it 7? Is it 2? Anyway, every certain number of years, all of our cells regenerate. And so what that means is if you are carrying stuff from your past, you are choosing to carry it because the cells that experienced that are gone.
Right? Yeah.
So there's all of this stuff behind it that's really, really fascinating. And the what with the neuroplasticity is this whole thing that in inbraining we talk about ourselves as human becomings rather than human beings, because as a human being it's in the present, and that's important that you are in your present, and yet at the same time we are constantly evolving. Our highest expressing today will be different to our highest expressing in a week's time, in a month's time, in a year's time, because each time we move into a highest expressing, we're at a level, and then there's the next level. And generative decision making and generative wisdom, which is where we're going, generative learning, is okay. I've got here, and I now know this, and I'm really excited about it. And what that means, I've now got this new perspective on the world. And actually, now that I'm in this new place, I can see that there's another thing I want to discover, right? And this is one of the reasons for me that I just love embraining, because I'm involved at an early stage where it's just excitingly learning something new pretty much every day. But also I arrived at a time when there's a lot of generating of new learning that comes with it. And so, you know, I did my certification 2.5 years ago, and I did my master coach this year. You know, and I'm looking at all of that kind of, each time I go, I learn more, and I'm open to more, and I, you know, and it's that whole idea of constantly generating, constantly becoming. We're always evolving and learning and growing as people, and the kind, you know, and because we're starting from compassion, and we're being creative with that, and we're being courageous with it, again, we're putting ourselves into a new place. We're choosing to, like you were saying, when life throws something at you, and you have stepped into a different place, and something gets thrown at you that you've had thrown at you previously. And I'm like this myself, you know, I there have been times when I've gone, I learned this lesson years ago. Why am I redoing it? And what I've discovered is that I've become much faster at recognizing when I'm doing that and going, okay, hold on, I have options. Put myself into a really good place here, and let's look at this differently, and I make a different choice. And it might just be a little bit of a different choice, but it takes me in a different direction. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to human becoming.
Okay. And when we talk about neuroplasticity, I mean, I don't want to get too technical on this, but obviously, obviously, you know, our brains are wired where, you know, it's a little like Pavlov's dog, you know, somebody rings a bell, I start slobbering. Now, if I want to change, well, okay, I don't. Okay. But,
I'm quite pleased about that.
Okay. But if you want to change that response, you have to set up a new neural pathway, okay, I'm no longer, I mean, for example, for me, I was struggling with my morning routine. And so my decision to break the morning routine of grabbing the phone and getting straight into, oh my God, I've got so many things to do today, was I roll out of bed and I go straight to the bathroom and brush my teeth. Now, as stupid as it seems that I just go brush my teeth and that puts me in a different mood. It was simply a small change that leads to my day has started intentionally, and therefore I'm going to go and meditate and journal before I allow myself to be crowded by, oh my God, I've got so many things to do today.
So one of the things Grant has taught me, which I love, is every morning waking up, and like you're saying, whether you do it when you're brushing your teeth or whatever, is that moment really almost in those very early waking moments of how am I going to be my highest expressing self today? And just putting that question into your mind as you start the day. And because otherwise, like you're saying, you get caught up very quickly in the routine of whatever it is. You know, someone wants your attention, you've got a meeting, you've got to race off to this, that, or the other. But by starting it with, how am I going to be my highest expressing today? Not how am I going to be my highest expressing in a week when I have a bit of time, but with everything I have going on in my day-to-day reality, how am I going to be my highest expressing? So that's one of the other things I love about this is, as human becomings, we are each uniquely individual, and it's about my human becoming, my highest expressing. You know, how do I do compassioning? how do I do awesoming, right? How do I do creating and co-creating and, resonating?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet at the same time, it's also how do I influence others to do their compassioning, their creating. So, yeah, so it is. And it's also like you're saying, often when people talk about transforming, right, I need to transform my life, I need to change my life, I need to sort this out, I've got this huge decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
It's this huge decision to make. It's like, well, actually, and notice where the hands are.
Yeah,
Right?
on
It's
your
a
head.
huge
Exactly.
decision to make. It's actually, well, what's a small thing we can start with? What's something that you could start with? Like you said, I'll brush my teeth. That automatically changes that pathway that I usually follow. So
Okay,
for me,
Sharon asks also, how do we utilize intentions?
um, right. So this works differently for different people, Sharon. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very visual person. So when I'm working through the roadmap for myself, or when other people are working me through the roadmap with Embraining, I find that I end up with a very intense, often moving visual, whatever, right? And that then becomes for me, as you that there's that has a very deep, true meaning for me, and so I then become very intent on what that meaning is. So one of those visions for me was me as a tree with these very intricate moving branches all over the place, but very grounded, and with lots of hummingbirds flying around in the branches, which is a whole nother story. For me, there was a real magic in that. And every now and then we all go through this. I'll have periods when I'm a bit down, I'm struggling to find the energy for the day. And all I need to do is to just take a moment, close my eyes, and there it is. There's my tree. And then I'm like, that's my intent. For other people, it is a written intent, or it's a, I know people that they're like wishing papers, right? And they'll write their kind of intent for the day on a piece of paper and then burn it.
Yeah.
Or it might be that they have a partner who's also open to this kind of thing, and they will tell them their intent for the day. But it's all built within it. That's one of the things that I found fascinating when I first came across Embraining, was it wasn't just science, and it wasn't just this esoteric belief systems. And the esoteric belief systems that Grant and Marvin looked at were across all faiths, right? So it's not just Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism or Islam. It is across many, many, many different belief systems. And again, Grant, being Grant, found patterns. He looked at where there might be different language, but actually when you then looked at the descriptions of what was happening, pretty much it's coming from the same source, right? And so he was like, okay, again, there's something real there. There's something that we need to look into and discover. So that kind of thing, the intent, the visualizing, all of that's built within it, but it is very much about coming from who you are. So one of the people I have a huge amount of respect for, who actually introduced me into Embraining, Suzanne Henwood, is she's a very beautiful Christian woman, and so for her, she very much uses this from that point of view, whereas another woman that I have a lot of respect for, who was on my certification with me, is a Sufi. And again, for her, it absolutely fits. So Embraining isn't really, well, it complements people's modalities, whatever those might be.
So just coming back to what you were saying before about that decision making, the changing way of life, that higher wisdom in spite of whatever changes is happening. We've gotten to a point where we were talking about, okay, you've come through all of this, things have changed, you've changed your you're adjusting your sails, so to speak, according to what I'm trying to think of a way to put this. You're adjusting your sails to what life is throwing you.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're constantly checking back in with that intention, with that, so you're doing it on a daily basis, but there's also a big picture then.
Yeah, so for me, when I think about intention, I need it to be a big picture.
Okay.
Which goes to being a hummingbird, right? But again, whole different story.
Yeah.
Whereas I know for some people, like we said earlier, that actually they need to start small. What's your intention for the next hour? And when I think about the times in my life when I've been deeply grieving, I've had some significant loss in my life, that's how I got through the early days of that period. It wasn't having this big intention. It was, what's my intention for the next 5 minutes?
Okay. Yeah.
What's my intention for the next half an hour?
All right.
What's my intention for the next hour? And so if that's what it is, if that's what it needs, and it's the same, and and embraining can help with that, because it's that whole thing around, what do I need, which is your gut brain? What do I want in this moment, which is your heart? And how might I do that? What does this mean to me? That's your head brain.
Yeah. Okay.
What do I know?
Are there any other questions, Lou, Sharon, Bernie, that you'd like us to address before I come up with some of my own?
Yeah, because Beth Ann struggles to come up with questions.
Okay, well, I don't see any coming off. Coming up quickly, but please, if you've got more questions, let us know. So I wanted to just ask quickly about something like habits and compulsions, and using embraining to make those changes. A little bit like I already said, like I changed one little thing in my morning routine in order to establish a new neural network. Okay. Lou said she'd love to hear more about heart math, but I'll let you go on heart math before I go back to my question.
To your habits and stuff. So Lou, heart math is, which looks like you know this because you've spelt it correctly, is an organization that looks specifically at how pretty much the neurocardiology really, which is so neuroscience is now becoming, unsurprisingly, there are certain silos developing, if you like. There's neurocardiology, there's gastro and bloody blah. Yeah, lots of long sciencey words. I dropped out of science when I was 14. But heart math do this amazing work where they're looking at how does your heart work from the point of view of actually not just the biology of how does your heart work and the neurology of how your heart works, but also the energy and the intelligence of your heart. How is it the complex adaptive functioning intelligence? What does it do? How does it do it? And because of all the work they'd done, Grant and Marvin and Grant, so Marvin helped Grant get this kick started. He did a whole lot of the original stuff, and then he kind of handed it over to Grant to continue working with while he went off and did other things. So Grant's the one in the last few years bringing in other members of the community who's been evolving it. And he's done a lot of work with the guys who run Heart Math around what they're discovering. So what Heart Math are discovering, what Grant's discovering, and then they have these conversations. And then he's talking to people in the gastro world. Beth's been working on the energetics side of things around that, which is very much around your gut brain. And from a head brain perspective, he's also been looking at artificial intelligence. So there's, as I said, there's so much application for this, and so much more that's being discovered. But the work that Heart Math does absolutely aligns with the work that we've been doing in embraining.
And I'd just like to add to that, Lou, one of the beautiful things about the Heart Math Project and the way that it comes in is that our autonomic nervous system if we go into fight or flight or even freeze, we're not going to make coherent decisions. So, like when we use the technology of HeartMath, which is great little toys that I really appreciate, just with our balanced breathing, and we can bring our heart rate into just a coherent state where we are relaxed but alert, and we're calm.
Yeah.
Then once we are in that, then we have a better communication and alignment of, okay, this is the right decision, as opposed to, oh my God, I got to run. I got to get out of here. And so, yeah.
I could talk about the heart for a very long time, Lou, but that's what the courses are for. But yeah, so we do use, as Beth Ann said, so we use some of the technology they've come up with in HeartMath to look at what we literally show you when you go into what we call balanced breathing, which is what we start all of our embraining from, is balanced breathing, because that brings us to a balanced state, really, where we can start working with our intelligences. We help you do that, and we show you literally on a graph what your heart has done as that's happened. So what it was doing before you got into balanced breathing, and then how quickly balanced breathing will bring you into this state of congruence, the state of being able to start. And certainly I use balanced breathing because I know that all of the time. So I'll be sitting on the tube on my way to work or a meeting, and I'll be doing balanced breathing to get myself into the right state to go into that.
And I know for me, since knowing that, that whole phrase, just breathe, took on a whole new meaning of, okay, if I want, if I've got a difficult situation, literally just breathing and then connecting of, okay, what is the inner wisdom that I need to connect with to make this decision? Even if it's a split second decision sort of thing, it's just that pause of, I can either react or I can respond. And how am I going to move forward? Understanding that balanced breathing gives me the space then to make a better decision, a more congruent, a more coherent decision of, I'm actually taking into account everything, even if it's a split second decision.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any more questions? All right. So then I do want to come back to just finishing up with the question about habits and those decisions to change habits in our life, and when you're looking at habits that I would change, for example, I know one of my decisions was that I was going to change my morning routine to include meditation that actually took me into congruence and alignment when I was looking at my day. So I recorded, for example, my own morning meditation that takes me through the sequence of checking in with my heart and compassion, with checking in with my head and creativity, with checking in to my gut on moving forward with courage. But it's more than that, because sometimes there's bad habits we want to break.
Yeah. So again, one of the things that we as a community are working on is avoiding words like bad, positive, negative, good. We talk about resourceful and unresourceful, because what we know is when we develop these habits, often we've done it at a young age. Either we've been taught to by parents or schooling or whatever. At the time, it was a very resourceful choice to make. Yeah. Okay. And so now it's about, okay, this is no longer resourceful to me. What would be more resourceful?
Yeah.
And there's so much study that shows how long it takes to change. And so some people think that neuroplasticity is like this magic, and you do your embraining, it opens up these neurological pathways for you. It says, here are a whole lot of options. Your gut brain goes, we want to do that one. You think, okay, I'm going to do that. You do it once, and you think, that's it, magic, it's done, sorted. Now, if that was the case, I would be doing yoga every morning, and I'm not, right? So, because, you know, I did it for 6 days, and I appear to have a very beautiful habit at the moment of starting my yoga practice, managing to do it for 6 days, and then stopping and not doing it for about 6 months, and then starting again. So, you know, that's a habit. So it is about, we open these neurological pathways and we go down them, but we also need to be closing off the unresourceful, because what neuroplasticity does is it opens up new options for you. It opens up, so the way we often describe it is, if you think about a field of hay, like high wheat or hay or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you, so whenever I hear this, I live right across the road from a huge common, and there is a particular corner that there's a footpath that goes around it. No one uses that footpath. They go across the corner. Yes. Absolutely. And when someone first did that, you could just see these little footsteps on the grass. Now there is literally a human width per sized path, because so many people have walked down it. And that's what it's about. It's about, when you open these new pathways, you need to repetitively follow that path in order to make that pathway an easy pathway for your neurology to follow at an unconscious level.
Yeah.
As opposed to having to consciously choose to follow that pathway and consciously choose to stop following the previous pathway. Mm-hmm. So, you know, embraining is transformational, absolutely. As I said, it's profoundly simple and simply profound, and yet it still requires you to make continual choices, to consciously engage, to consciously be present, in order to actually take that transformation and evolve as the human becoming you want to be.
All right, thank you. Well, all right. In closing up, obviously, we have an invitation to everybody to come join us in November in Panama, because Vikki will be coming to Panama to give a training in embraining. There's nothing to be said about the fact that she's going to have a holiday with me before that. That's not why we're doing this. But we are actually making the most of the fact that she's on this side of the continent, or on this continent rather than on the European one, to run a training over here. But tell us, summary form, what the training will be.
Okay, so we're doing 2 courses. We've got a 2-day course that's called Evolve, and that's about how do you use embraining for yourself. The one that we're more excited about, because it gets really in depth, is the certification. And as Beth said earlier on, people do the certification not just because they're a coach, but because they want to use it for themselves and for their family or their team if they're a manager, and their health work. It's got, you know, really wide-ranging opportunities. But for you to be able to use the roadmap one-to-one with other people, you do need to complete the certification. And so that's what that is. It's a 4-day course, and the very first day is what we like to refer to as the information superhighway. And we do a lot of giving you information in the first day, and then the other 3 days are taking all that information and actually putting it into practice and applying it, and adding more layers of information as we go. And so that at the end of it, on the final afternoon, you do an assessment where you practice with somebody else and they practice on you, and you'll be assessed as to your what you've learnt. And
but I will say this, that days 2 and 3 are a lot of practice. You're just practicing specific parts as opposed to the entire process. And then on day 4, it's like, okay, now let's take all those little pieces that you've practiced and put it together into one single session.
Yeah, and it will be a lot of fun because as a Kiwi, I'm incapable of being too formal about anything. But you do get one of these at the end of it with its official seal. So embraining is a professional field. It's certified practice. So that's what the course is, and we're going to be doing it in beautiful Panama City in a wonderful hotel that has a pool on top of the roof, which I'm very excited about because by that point in the UK, it will be dark at 4 o'clock and yes, cold, wet and miserable.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bernie. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Sharon, for being with us. And the questions that you've asked today, really appreciate it. Yes. And we will be putting this onto YouTube in case anybody wants to watch it or share it. I will be posting a link to it from my Facebook page.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. And I will just turn off the recording. Perfect.